Hello and welcome to Ben Ross's Conservatorium of Audio. I'm Ben Rosser, and today we're going to be taking a look at getting a track prepared for mastering. Whether you're mastering it yourself or if you're handing it over to a mastering engineer, there's a few tips and techniques that not only help make life easier during the mastering process, but can also help you to get a much better quality sounding finished product. So there's a few common mistakes that I find tend to be made during the mixing phase when people are getting ready for mastering. So we're just going to go through each of those, and I'll show you why the wrong thing has been done and what you can do to correct it. So we've just got a fairly simple session sitting here at the moment, just something one of my mates whipped up, just a bit of an idea that he wanted to let me listen to. So we're going to pretend that this one is a finished track. We've finished the mix and we're about to get it ready for the mastering process. So one of the first problems we'll notice having a look around this session, if we have a look on the master channel, we've got two problems here, the first of which being the compressor, and the second is the utility, which is being used to bring the gain down after the sound comes out of the compressor. Both of these are bad things in their own right. Firstly, with the compression, a lot of people who have brought me tracks to master have had limiters or compressors on their master channel. This tends to detract from the overall sound of the production once it's been mastered. What you'll find if you add a typical compressor or limiter on your master channel, which hasn't been designed specifically to work on an overall mix, is you will start to lose tonal quality, as well as removing quite a bit of dynamic range that can be handy for the mastering engineer when he goes to master the track. You'll find even though a mastering engineer does bring up the overall level of the track during the mastering process, generally when they do it, they are using extremely good tools that, as I mentioned, have been specifically designed for the job they're being asked to do. So as a result, you'll tend to find that you get a much better quality final product if you allow the mastering engineer to apply any dynamic range compression or maximization during the mastering process. So again, try and avoid putting a compressor or a limiter on your master channel. Sometimes in cases where you have a bit of a gritty or warm sounding compressor, you might apply a bit of that one on the master channel, but try and avoid taking away too much of the dynamic range of the sound. Again, that's something that's better off being controlled in the hands of a mastering engineer. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to delete that compressor, and we'll have a look at the issue that this utility is causing. This is a very similar effect to what we'd get if we had the master fader pulled down, like so. Basically, what you're doing by adjusting the volume in this way, whether you're using the utility on the master channel or whether you're using the master channel fader, is you will be adding some slight mathematical inaccuracy to the sound. Without getting too in-depth with programming and floating point processing in a computer system, you're better off leaving your master fader at 0 dB and not applying anything like what we've done with the utility device here. As I said, you will get some mathematical inaccuracy in the sound in the form of very slight distortion. And while it may not be audible in the overall mix, you may find during the mastering process that sometimes it can be brought out and enhanced to the point where it does become audible. So again, we can solve that problem just by deleting that. So if we play this now, you'll see that we are getting some clipping on the master channel. What some people would do, which is where we get into the problem we just looked at, is they would just pull down the master fader. Again, this is the wrong way to approach it. Better off leaving the master channel on 0, not adding any error to the signal, grabbing hold of all of your main channels and just pulling them down a little bit. In most DAWs, you can adjust more than one channel simultaneously, which is handy because it will keep your fader ratios between channels the way they're supposed to be and won't affect the overall sound of your mix. It will just pull down the overall level. So if we play that one now, you'll see we're not getting any clipping. It's not as loud as it was due to the fact that it's not being compressed, but again, that's something the mastering engineer will probably be happier about more than anything. So now that we've looked at a couple of those simple issues, we're going to move on to dither. Now, dither is something that some people have a bit of trouble getting their head around, but the long and the short of it is when you're taking one sound with a high bit rate and you're dropping its bit rate, you apply dither to help retain some of the depth and dynamic range that you had at the higher bit rate. So for example, if we're going to bounce a file down from Live's 32-bit mix engine to say a 24 or 16-bit file, you generally apply dither. However, dither is something that should be used at the very end of the production process. So if you're working on a mix that's not going to be mastered, feel free to throw dither on it and you will retain some of the quality of the sound. However, if the track is going to a mastering engineer or if you're going to master it yourself, dither should be the very last thing that's applied during the mastering process, not during the mix process. So if you're unsure about that one and you're handing it over to a mastering engineer, don't apply dither. It's the easiest, simple rule with that one. There's also usually a little bit of confusion as far as what file formats and what bit depths and bit rates to use when you're bouncing the file down. Basically, you're better off talking to the mastering engineer who's going to be working with your material first. But in general, a 44.1 kHz 24-bit file usually will suffice. You don't want to go any lower. 16-bit files usually lose too much quality. And if the mastering engineer is capable of a higher quality, that's always a good thing because you'll be retaining as much of the quality of the mix as possible when it goes to the mastering stage. I have also had some people that have gone to hand me MP3 files to master. That is probably one of the worst things that you could possibly do. Basically, you bounce to MP3, which means you're throwing away a large percentage of the audio quality in the first place, handing over a lossy compressed file, which then has to be mastered. So all of the grittiness and the grain that is created when compressing to MP3 will actually become enhanced. So what you end up with in the end is something that's a lot worse than what you would have got out of the mix in the first place. So never ever hand a mastering engineer a file that's been compressed with MP3 or any other form of lossy or lossless compression. So the last thing I want to have a bit of a talk about is just tonal balance in tracks. It's quite an important thing. Say if you have too much bass poking out in the frequency spectrum of a mix or too much high frequency, those frequencies that are poking out will prevent the mastering engineer from being able to do the best possible job. So one of the best things you can do is to grab hold of a frequency analyzer. You can use something like the Spectrum, which comes with Ableton. However, I typically prefer something that's got a bit more power behind it, such as the Waves PAS Analyzer, which gives you a full spectrum analysis, gives you panning and phase analysis, and also allows you to see peak and RMS levels. So this is quite a handy tool when you do come to the mastering process as well. So as we can see, our most peaky frequency here is around 60 Hz. We've also got a fair bit coming through around 16 Hz. You don't really need that stuff down that low, however that could be left to the mastering engineer. In this case, we may want to just pull a little bit of bass out of the overall sound, even just by applying an EQ to the master channel, and that can help to sort of pull down those peaky frequencies a little bit, just to help the mastering engineer be able to bring out the track to its fullest extent. So there's a few hints and tips for you there. And I hope that helps you to get a better sound when you go to get your stuff mastered, or if you're mastering it yourself. And I hope to see you again in another Ben Ross's Conservatorium of Audio tutorial. Thanks for watching.